I'm Scott Lucas. This is today's EAWorldview on Israel and Gaza. How both Netanyahu and Hamas benefit from a Groundhog Day's war. Last weekend, a writer named Peter Beaumont wrote in The Observer of London that this was a futile war of Israeli airstrikes against Gaza, matched by Hamas rockets on Israel, because nothing would change. After an uncertain period of time, weeks, months, we would still be in the same political, military, economic situation. He's half right. Nothing will change after this phase of conflict, merely the latest in a series of clashes in recent years. But what he misses is the bigger point, that for both Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the Gazan leadership of Hamas, they are fighting this war precisely so nothing will change. You're Benjamin Netanyahu. For years, you have been the Prime Minister of Israel, but for years you've faced pressure that you have to reach a peace settlement, an agreement with the Palestinians. You face the pressure from Palestinians, of course, but you also face it from the international community, from Palestinian supporters in the region, and even from some Israelis who are tired of the ongoing fight. But you really don't want a settlement with the Palestinians. Quite frankly, you don't want a Palestinian state. That would give them a legitimacy and authority that you don't really want to have to confront. It would also give them the ability to develop their own resources, political, economic, even security forces, unless somehow you could manage to keep a cap to hold them down. So what do? You go through the motions of talks, but then at some point you put up a reason why you really can't go through negotiations. Because, those Palestinians just can't be trusted. That's what this conflict in Gaza serves. As in 2008, when Israeli forces bombed and launched a ground offensive into the territory, as in 2012, when Israel again used airstrikes to try to pound Hamas into submission. This is effectively a way of saying, even if we don't win, even if Hamas exists after this, there's no way we can ever deal with them. It puts an awkward decision to the other main faction in Palestinian politics, Fatah. If you want to negotiate with us, you have to do it without Hamas. You have to disown them. You have to almost push Gaza to the side. Netanyahu may not get negotiations, but he doesn't really want them. And that's the beauty of how achieving nothing in this current conflict will continue to prop him up in power with no resolution beyond that power in sight. But what about Hamas? After all, they're the ones who are supposedly absorbing the punishment, taking the blows from Israeli airstrikes. Well, only in a very limited sense. Let's be frank here, that of the almost 200 Palestinians who have been killed in the past week, almost 2/3 of them have been civilians. Hamas have lost a few fighters, but they haven't lost many of their leadership. Why? Because when the airstrikes come, when the missiles rain in, you go to the mattresses. You shelter, what Israel calls hiding behind civilians. To be honest, it's a fairly sensible strategy. There's no way Hamas can win a head-on conflict with Israel, so you basically protect yourselves. But Hamas gets much more than this as well. Look, they've been in power in Gaza since 2006. They have defeated their rival Fatah, but only at the ballot box 8 years ago. Since then, they've had to try to maintain some idea of authority amongst a building economic crisis, amongst continuing questions as to whether they are representatives of all Palestinians or just a small group of them. If Hamas absorbed the punishment of Israel, they can claim that legitimacy. Look, we defend you. We're the ones that maintain your effort of resistance. We are the ones who continue to stand up to a much bigger, well-armed foe, and in some way, we emerge victorious. Sure, it's a shallow argument, but it's kept them in power, and it's likely to do so as long as Israel keeps attacking. So if Hamas win and Netanyahu win, who loses? Easy. The Gazan people. Another 140, 150 dead this week, perhaps dozens, scores, hundreds more before each side decides, okay, now we'll declare a ceasefire. But who really cares about the Gazan people? They don't help Benjamin Netanyahu stay in power, and they're not really necessary for Hamas to stay in power. So we go into a Groundhog's Day conflict. Again and again, we poke our heads up, notice airstrikes and rockets, and go back to hide, because nothing will be resolved. I'm Scott Lucas, and this is today's EA Worldview on Israel and Gaza.